everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Simone Nizell, and I am the Education and Outreach Coordinator for Del Oro Caregiver Resource Center. And I'll point your attention to the screen here. I do have a presentation to share a little bit more with you about our services and supports and eligibility for accessing those services and supports. Our contact information is on the screen here. We're located out of Citrus Heights, California in Sacramento County, but we serve Calaveras. We actually serve a 13-county region, which I'll talk about in a moment, that includes a lot of the rural counties in Northern California too. So you can call us at 916-728-9333. That's our main line. We're also online. We have a website and we're on social media. If you are interested, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and now actually LinkedIn as well. So this is my contact information, my title. Again, if you want to get in touch with me directly for education and programming needs, or if there is a senior resource or community resource fair happening in Calaveras County and you'd like Del Oro to come out and have a booth and share about our organization, you can contact me here directly. The phone number is the same as our main line, but my extension is 114. And I just wanted to share a little bit about my background and how I came to Del Oro. Before I started working at Del Oro, I was actually a client of theirs. So I took care of my mom. I apologize, I didn't realize my wire was sticking out here. I'm trying to be camera ready and informal at the same time. It's really hard. So I was a caregiver for my mom back from 2011 to 2014, and I became a client at Del Oro's. My mom had cancer that metastasized, went to her brain, and so her symptoms mimicked those that you might see with dementia at the later stages. I say this because a lot of the people we work with have chronic conditions like some sort of cognitive impairment, some sort of neurological disease, but cancer is also a diagnosis that we see among other chronic conditions as well. But all that's to say that I was a client of Del Oro, so I have experience with their services firsthand. And my support group my support system, I should say, was very small when I was caregiving for my mom. And I'm an only child. She was a single parent, so it was a very just small a support system. So having access to Del Oro was such a lifesaver for me and for my mom. It helped me to keep my head above water, take care of my own health, so that I could continue to support my mom. And it was very important for my mom to age in place or to live at home until the end of her life. And some of the services that I'll talk about today allowed me to honor that wish that she had. Now, it's not to say that there's anything wrong with placement. It's just that Del Oro can help a caregiver keep someone at home for as long as possible by supporting the family caregiver who's supporting them. So I obviously believe in this agency. I benefited from their services at one point. I became a teacher, and then this opportunity to serve at Del Oro opened up, and I obviously was very eager to join the staff. It's a wonderful place to work. So just a little bit of background about the CRC system. So Del Oro is one of 11 caregiver resource centers across the state of California. We have, again, 11 in total. You can see they're represented by the stars on the map. And why that's important is because some of the services and supports I talk about today, you might be interested in for someone who lives outside of our service territory, in which case you would want to refer them to this website, www.caregivercalifornia.org, where they can find their local CRC. So let's say that you have someone living down in Southern California, in San Diego, and you want to get them set up with services at a CRC. Well, this website will refer them to their local CRC, which would be Southern CRC. And anyway, it's a great resource, and it's important too to know that we exist in this larger context too, because on the table here, I've passed out these calendars, and I'll just grab one to showcase. Because we're part of a statewide system of CRCs, and because the pandemic just changed everything for us, we really started collaborating more as a system, and we've developed a statewide calendar of caregiver educational programming. So each month we're able to offer roughly 30 online programs that cover various caregiving topics. At Del Oro, to kind of put it in perspective, we're able to offer maybe 4 to 5 classes, and that includes online and in-person programming for our service territory. But inevitably, we'll get people at different stages in the caregiving journey who call and maybe want a class on legal and financial counseling, and we might not be offering it that month. And so the nice thing about being part of this system, one of the nice things about being part of this system, is that we can always refer people to this statewide calendar where we typically have a more robust set of offerings, and we have classes in other languages as well. Spanish, Vietnamese, Hmong. We're trying to develop programming in Russian as well. So it's a really great resource for anyone to enjoy. And these classes are open to the public, so you don't even necessarily have to be a client of ours to access them. A little history about Del Oro. You can see on the map the counties that we cover and on the screen. So I'm going to try to rattle them all off. When I do this, I always feel like I sound like Johnny Cash. Alpine, Amador, Calaveras, Colusa, El Dorado, Nevada, Placer, Sacramento, San Joaquin, Sierra, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba. So it's a really large service territory, collectively known as the Gold Country Counties, which is where we get our name Del Oro, which is Spanish for of gold. We were founded in 1987. We just celebrated our 35th anniversary, and we're an independent private nonprofit. And why that's important is that some of our sister agencies in the CRC system are affiliated or exist under the umbrella of a university or hospital system. And so the way that they operate is unique and different to the way that we operate as an independent private nonprofit. So we are currently funded by the California Department of Aging and the Area 4 Agency on Aging, as well as through grants and other private contributions. I highlight this because sometimes people hear nonprofit and they don't necessarily understand what that means. Essentially, we're not selling a service, we're facilitating a service on behalf of a specific population. We receive funding from our state and federal government, and then we disperse that funding on behalf of the people we serve. So that's kind of how it works. So our mission is to improve the well-being of family caregivers, specifically unpaid family caregivers, people who are doing this not in a professional capacity, and provide support throughout the caregiving process. And the way that this works is through...
Hold on, I write down a lot.
Oh, sure, I'm sorry. If I'm ever moving too quickly, please do let me know. Again, I'll just leave our mission up here for a while. Essentially, we exist because there are there's an enormous amount of unpaid family caregivers across the United States, but certainly within the state of California. I have a couple of fact sheets up here if you'd like to grab them before your meeting ends about caregiver health and a profile on California caregivers. I will say that the numbers are growing because our baby boomer generation is starting to age, and a lot of people, most people, in fact, who've been surveyed, have expressed a desire to age in place, meaning that they want to live at home and they want to eventually pass away at home. And what that really requires is the support of unpaid family caregivers, ultimately. Some people can live independently at home throughout the rest of their lives. Many people at some point will need support as they are navigating chronic conditions or debilitating diseases. And so it's really important that we have some sort of safety net for our caregivers, because if they burn out, there's an entire population of vulnerable people who don't have their support. So that's why we exist, and that's why this is our mission. So our available services kind of break down into two different categories, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. But I do want to highlight that all of our services are free to the caregiver client, meaning you're not coming out of pocket for these. You call us, we provide this service free of charge because we're receiving that funding from state and federal dollars, okay? But this is good news because many of our clients call and, caregiving can be really expensive. And so some of the services that we provide are not only a lifeline for them in terms of making it more sustainable to provide care, but it's also a financial lifeline too. So you'll see in this first set of services, we have information and referral. And what that means is that someone can call our agency and ask for information that will help them do caregiving in their home, and we can refer them out. So the example that I like to give is, someone calls Del Oro and says, I need to find a place that will install grab bars in the bathroom at a reasonable rate because my care receiver's mobility is changing, and we can refer you out. We're not contractors in-house, so we couldn't come to your home with a toolbox and install those grab bars, but we can send you to someone in your community who can help you with that. We also offer support groups. So we have in-house support groups that are facilitated by Del Oro staff, but then we maintain a listing of local support groups on our website, and it's broken down by county. So due to the pandemic did see a lot of support groups move online, but there are many that are starting to meet in person again. And support groups are a really, really important resource for family caregivers. Peer support is known to be an effective way of dealing with the emotions of caregiving. And so we can again provide that resource for you. I need to find a grief support group in Calaveras County. We have that listing. We're not necessarily out there facilitating it ourselves. It's a third party, but it saves you a little bit of work so that you're not, searching in this big World Wide Web. And then we have our education and training, which I talked about a little bit earlier when I was referring to the statewide calendar. But education and training is this service that is free and open to our public. And really it boils down to programming that focuses on how to train people to do this caregiving work. And a lot of caregiving actually requires a shift in mindset because people come into this not ever having been trained to be a caregiver and just assume they can go hard, 24/7 a day, not meeting their own needs, and they burn out really fast. So training people how to do this work sustainably, along with the logistics of caregiving, medical tasks, how to negotiate the medical system, which is really complicated, things like that. Because our education and training is free and open to the public, we'll obviously have a lot of caregivers accessing it, but we also might get professionals who want to access it too. So it's a really great resource. Again, these are free. You call us and you're not a client of Del Oro, and we can still provide these services. We can still refer you to a local resource or support group. You can still attend one of these classes. On this side of our services spectrum, these are what are known as our direct services or our granted services: family consultation, respite care, legal and estate planning, and short-term counseling. And I'm going to explain each of these in greater depth in a moment, but I want to underscore the fact that because these are granted services, we reserve these for Del Oro clients, meaning that you have to have established eligibility with us and be a client of our agency in order to receive these. Okay? Any questions so far?
I have a question.
Yeah,
There's a
Susan.
lot of people that are taking care of family members that will tap into IHSS so that they can at least get paid for like the 2 hours a week.
Sure.
Does that knock them out of this program, or are they still considered unpaid caregivers?
That's a great question. And I'm actually going to address this again when we get to eligibility, but I don't mind answering it now. What IHSS does is make someone ineligible for our granted services, but they're still eligible for information referral, support groups, and education and training. Does that make sense?
It does a little bit.
I'll explain a little bit more again when we get to eligibility, the reasons why that happens, or why that is the way that it is. But that's definitely a common question that we get, and it's an important thing to know before you call us and ask for, say, respite care. Okay. Yes, you had a question.
I think that you're going to be talking about eligibility more. I'm just thinking. What makes you eligible besides the IHSS, which is big?
Yes, again, I'll get to that at the end, but the big thing really to know is that you're an unpaid family caregiver and you're providing support for someone who has a chronic debilitating condition.
What if the person who needs care has serious money?
That is not necessarily an exclusion, and I'll explain that at the end.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I needed.
Yeah, of course. Great questions. So, family consultation is one of our first direct or granted services, and this is really the, how do I put this? Like, this is really the hub of the wheel, right? You can think about the other granted or direct services as the spokes that kind of emerge from this hub, but a family consultation is about connecting a client to a person on staff called a family consultant, and this family consultant becomes the direct line of communication with the organization, really becomes the caregiver client's advocate, ally, care planner, all of the above. So the family consultant is the one who provides ongoing caregiver support by first doing that initial intake with a caregiver client. And what happens during the intake is again, setting you up for services, establishing you as a client at Del Oro. And then it's usually followed by an assessment. So the family consultant tries to get a picture of what the caregiving situation looks like. And obviously it's going to be different for each caregiver. The family consultant wants to get a picture of what the home life is like. What kind of home are you living in? Are you in a city? Are you in a rural situation? What kind of resources geographically are already available to you? What does your current support system look like? So the family consultant, the person on staff who usually has a background in social work or gerontology, who works directly with the client, does that intake and assessment, and then helps to build a plan of care alongside the family caregiver. So based upon that assessment, the family consultant can make recommendations about what kinds of services and supports would be most appropriate at this point in the caregiving journey. Some people call us, get established with us, and don't necessarily need, let's say, respite right off the bat, but they really need a support group. This diagnosis has been devastating for the whole family, and they need peer support. The family consultant can again make recommendations that are tailored toward the family caregiver, and then later on, that client may decide that they want to access respite. Now is the time to do it. And this gets, the plan of care that the family consultant develops gets tweaked and updated through this process of reassessment. So the family consultant will call a caregiver at least once every 6 months and check in. Because many of our clients are supporting people with long-term and chronic conditions, the condition will change, right? So, the client may be doing great at the beginning of the year and not so great at the end of the year. And so that plan of care evolves depending upon the needs of the client and the person that they're supporting. And again, the family consultant is really the person who has that personal relationship with the client and supports them in this way. The family consultant also starts to facilitate these other direct services, respite being one of the most popular and one of the most important. Respite, I still get questions about what does respite mean. Respite is simply a short-term break, and it can be provided in the form of informal respite where, let's say, a friend comes over and relieves a caregiver for an hour so that they can go grocery shopping. We obviously want to leverage those informal supports, but sometimes a family caregiver needs regular professional support, professional respite in order to continue doing this work. They need someone to come into the house. I see you have a question. I'll get to you in one moment. They need someone to come into the house and give them a break in the form of in-home care, or they need to take a break by setting their loved one up at an adult day program where they can get socialization and congregate meals while the caregiver goes and takes care of themselves, takes care of business that they need to take care of. I'm almost finished, and then I'll jump over here to your question. Now, again, we're not an in-home care agency ourselves. So another popular question I get when I share about Del Oro is, so you guys send us caregivers from your agency? No. Again, we're based out of Sacramento, so it'd be really hard to send one of us out to, Calaveras to support a caregiver living there. Instead, what we do is we contract with local in-home care, an adult day program, or local in-home care agencies and adult day programs. And then we cover the cost of that support. So again, that family consultant kind of facilitates this process. Our agency covers the cost on behalf of the caregiver, so they're not paying out of pocket to have someone come into their home for a few hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays each week, or to have their loved one go to an adult day program on Mondays and Wednesdays. Or even, and I didn't mention this before, staying in a skilled nursing facility for maybe 2-3 weeks after a fall or after care needs have changed significantly. So, again, we contract with local agencies, local adult day programs, and all of these entities have gone through a rigorous process of approval through our board of directors. So it's not like we're just pulling people off the street to do this kind of work, which is another question that I get. Now, I want to bounce over here. You had your hand up earlier.
I have two questions.
Sure.
How do you coordinate with hospice?
How do we coordinate with hospice?
Yes.
So, hospice is typically something that a caregiver um, or a care receiver becomes eligible for, and they coordinate separately with the caregiver. Our services can be a supplement to hospice services. But yeah, we're not necessarily going to work uh, closely with the hospice agency, but the caregiver can tap or leverage both of us to support them through that season of the caregiving journey. I know you had a second question, and then I see some more questions over here.
Okay, this is sort of a weird one, but it's a true situation I'm dealing with right now. I am the executor of a person who has Alzheimer's. She has 24-hour care at home paid by the estate. One of the caregivers is from Ethiopia. Her mother is dying. She wants to go back home and say goodbye to mom.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to take about a week. She's our night shift, 20 every night, 7 days a week. I am not replacing her. So we need to get my little lady into a respite facility. Would you be, your organization, help with that process? Find it, maybe even fund it, or just find it?
It's very possible we could support with this. I might, with the caveat of like the timeline that you're sort of indicating. It sounds like this is kind of an urgent situation.
Mom might die before we get organized.
Right. So because we're a nonprofit, because we're funded by state and federal dollars, our funding kind of ebbs and flows throughout the year. Our fiscal year ends in July, and we have about I believe it's at least several weeks. We have a waiting list before we can get a client fully established with us, right, to do an intake. And so when someone needs immediate respite, I always just want to caution you that there is a little bit of wait time. So it may not be possible for us to get you in the door on your timeline. And it's not to say that support isn't available. You can access other supports that we have. In this particular situation, it sounds like the individual in question who needs support would be eligible for services, but she might have to wait for a period of time that's not conducive to what's going on. Does that answer your question?
Yes, the timeline is.
Yeah. Okay, I saw some other hands up, so I want to make sure I answer questions.
I was just going to make a comment.
Yeah.
That I happen to work for Adventist Health Home Care Services, Home Health and Hospice. And so I'm going to toss my card over to you.
Great.
If there's any questions that I can answer, but to go back to your question, we would work very closely with the caregivers that are in place, just so that you know that. I just wanted to address that question.
She's in Stockton, unfortunately.
Oh,
But otherwise.
but our hospice, our hospice covers parts of Stockton, so. Okay.
I think that's excellent, and I think one of the ways in which Del Oro might be able to assist is by highlighting how your family can use hospice for this particular situation where there are a lot of moving parts. So we might not be able to get you set up with respite right away, but you could call, talk to a staff member. We have someone called the Worker of the Week, or WOW, one of our family consultants who takes community calls, and they might be able to just kind of troubleshoot with the family. Like, here's what I would recommend. This is how you might want to coordinate with hospice. Again, we're not the ones who are coordinating with hospice on their behalf, but we can kind of guide the family, the caregiver through that maze, because there's a lot to think about. Yeah.
We are big on teamwork.
Yeah.
Like, we have to work together as a team.
Definitely. And
Most definitely. And so if so we could help also drive the referral to a respite place. Not we couldn't cover it.
Well, I'm talking actually two different cases.
Oh, okay.
One I've got is a dying person who's, I don't know how long she's going to live. And they're
Mhm.
And, you know, we've got half the garden club going, I can have a little 2 hours on Thursday, you know. This doesn't, it gets crazy.
But it sounds like there's a wonderful support system
There
that's
is a support
available.
system, but it's kind of like,
It's
the key
piecemeal.
is somebody at the top
Yeah.
sitting down and having a schedule. I mean,
Yeah.
you
Sure.
know that stuff.
A family consultant might be able to point out, tools or technologies to help with coordination. They might be able to refer out to a care manager in the community as well who could help provide that oversight that you're talking about. So again, our information and referral is a really great resource, and it's just again one piece of the puzzle. You mentioned collaboration earlier. We believe in collaboration too. We know that we're part of a caregiver's toolbox, and we want that caregiver to have as many tools as possible at their disposal so that they can do this work more sustainably, more healthfully, and more happily. You had your question earlier.
Yeah, you mentioned adult daycare, and we'd love to have that in our little local counties again.
Yeah.
How many adult daycares are there now in the region? I worked long ago in El Dorado County Public Health, and my office was actually in their adult daycare, so I saw how wonderful it was.
Right. I unfortunately cannot tell you that number off the top of my head, and I am sorry for that. It has changed because some adult day programs closed down during the pandemic. Some are reopening, but I would say that we have a good number at this point. I do want to highlight that we don't have like one in every single county. For the reasons that you kind of alluded to earlier, it would be so ideal if we had one per county, but some of our smaller rural counties, for instance, Alpine, we just don't, there's not the infrastructure for an adult day program at this time. And so if adult day programming was something the caregiver was requesting, we might have to refer them to one in another county. Or in-home care might be a more preferable route for respite. I hope that answers some of your question. Okay, I'm going to keep plugging away here. Just a few more direct services to talk about, and there definitely will be time for questions at the end too. Our legal and estate planning is essentially a service in which we contract with local elder law and estate planning attorneys, and again, cover the cost on behalf of the caregiver client to talk with that person to get affairs in order. One major piece of caregiving that is difficult to negotiate is just all of the paperwork and power of attorney and living trust versus will. And we offer education around this to kind of help people get familiar with what to expect. But it's really nice to be able to sit down with a lawyer and get those affairs in order. Some people come into this ready to go. They've had power of attorney established for 10 years. They have a trust that they revise yearly, which is wonderful. This service is still available to them, whether they decide to use it or not. The majority of the clients who do access this really need that help with all of the legalese. I know that I was one of the clients who needed support with this because we just did not. We weren't planning for my mother to decline as rapidly as she did. And so it was really helpful talking to a lawyer, figuring out, how best to negotiate my mother's wishes, especially with regards to her health, but also her finances. So a lawyer that we contract with can help to create or update plans. They can also answer kind of the sticky questions about Medi-Cal. There is a difference between Medi-Cal and Medicare, which I'll try to differentiate when we get to eligibility. But Another resource that's really helpful, attorneys, consultation with an attorney can run, several $100s an hour. So having,
What's the tree in Stockton if you're an expert in trust?
there you go. So
I mean, I've gone through it.
yeah. So having that cost covered for a several hour consultation can be a huge load off of a caregiver's mind. And then the last direct service that we provide, and this is another important one. I mean, they're all important, but we know for a fact that caregiver mental health tends to suffer, especially when providing support for an individual who has a long-term chronic and degenerative disease. And it's interesting, the AARP did a study in 2020 and found that more caregivers were reporting moderate to high levels of stress with their caregiving, and just kind of overall health outcomes, including mental health, have declined from 2015 to 2020, which is not great, seeing as how we're going to be leaning more heavily on this population of unpaid family caregivers in the years to come. So it's really important to support mental health. We believe that at Del Oro, and we offer this short-term counseling for our clients. Again, contracting with local clinicians, so social workers, therapists in the community. We cover the cost of 6 counseling sessions, and the caregiver client can elect to stay on with that therapist in perpetuity, or they can use those 6 sessions to address an immediate mental health crisis and get support and tools. We don't ask how you use it, but it's there, and it's also a popular resource. The short-term counseling is, I think, especially important for caregivers who are negotiating the grief that's involved with caregiving. I can, again, attest to this from my own personal experience. I just wasn't even aware of how much anticipatory grief I was experiencing with my mom. She hadn't passed away, but she was like she was dying over the course of a year. It was really hard to witness that and go to work and take care of her and run the household. And it was nice to be able to process that with someone who could normalize it, give me some tools so that I could continue to support my mom and our household. And not all caregivers think that not all caregivers, though I would say that this is changing for the better. Not all caregivers feel comfortable, addressing mental health. They feel like there might be a stigma attached to that. This service can really kind of help dispel the stigma and, again, provide some good support in the process.
Just a
Yes.
comment. If you are 65 years old, Medicare pays for those counseling.
Wonderful. So this can be another kind of supplement to that. Yeah, and it can also be, you're working with your family consultant to identify a counselor that you want to use. You might find someone in your community that you really like, use these sessions, and then potentially continue that through Medicare if it's covered. So it's again, just a great resource. Let's talk about eligibility, and then we'll wrap up. So again, I want to highlight that these services are for unpaid family caregivers, and our eligibility criteria for accessing our direct or granted services is determined by what our funders tell us. So the California Department of Aging tells us that a caregiver must reside in one of our 13 counties. Makes sense, right? And then the care receiver has a brain impairment or a neurological disease that was acquired at 18 or older, so in adulthood. This is important because there are services for children with brain impairments, cognitive issues, neurological diseases, and we kind of can't overlap in providing services. The care receiver, again, the individual with the diagnosis, is not receiving Medi-Cal or IHSS benefits. So this goes back to a question earlier. IHSS stands for In-Home Support Services, And this is a special program through Medi-Cal in which a caregiver can actually receive payment for doing caregiving duties. And it's reserved for individuals who would identify as lower income. Medi-Cal is not the same as Medicare. Okay, they're very different programs, and we tend to support more individuals with Medicare because with Medi-Cal, we kind of pick up where Medi-Cal leaves off in terms of supports for unpaid family caregivers. And if they're receiving IHSS, there's a duplication in services if we try to support someone who is already accessing IHSS. Does that make sense?
So somebody who has Medicare, Medi-Cal would not be.
Exactly. Someone who has both would not be eligible for those director granted services, but doesn't mean that, they call us and we say, sorry, can't help you. Again, going back to this screen for a moment, we still have information and referral support group and education and training that they can access.
Because we're having kind of a crisis in trying to find in-home support service workers.
Providers.
Yeah, providers.
Yeah, it's kind of a larger struggle right now. Even with agencies, there's a shortage of professional caregivers. The pandemic really did a number on caregiving. So I completely understand. The Agency on Aging, Area 4, tells us that a caregiver is an adult, unpaid or informal caregiver, and the person they're supporting, the care receiver, is a senior citizen. And Area 4 says that a senior citizen is someone 60 years of age or older. I didn't make up the rule here. And they have limitations with 2 or more activities of daily living, or a cognitive impairment or a neurological disorder. So the essentially limitations with 2 or more activities of daily living, the person might not have an Alzheimer's diagnosis, but perhaps they have mobility issues and they have diabetes. And these really require a lot from a family caregiver in terms of support, and so they would be eligible. When we talk about activities of daily living, we're talking about eating, bathing, dressing, those kinds of things, that the basic activities. Again, the care receiver cannot be receiving Medi-Cal, and the caregiver can't be accessing IHSS through Medi-Cal. I want to conclude eligibility by saying that because we're funded by state and federal dollars, this is all subject to change. In fact, what's interesting is that a year ago, we were actually funded through the Department of Healthcare Services. So this is a relatively new agency that's sort of taken us on, the California Department of Aging. So I want to make that clear so that no one calls us 3 years down the line and says, well, I saw that broadcast 3 years ago, and that's what that lady said. This is all subject to change, but for right now, this is what is in effect. I also would like to highlight that we're really fortunate in California because we have something called a master plan on aging, and I see some people nodding their heads. This is an exciting piece of policy because it's really trying to prepare our state for what's coming in the future, trying to develop intentional infrastructure that's going to support our aging population, the people who are supporting vulnerable adults who are aging, and our economy. Our economy is going to change in the next 10 to 20 years because people are retiring, right? So Master Plan on Aging has one pillar that focuses specifically on making caregiving that works. And part of that pillar of making caregiving that works is finding and recruiting and training more professional caregivers and IHSS providers, and also offering community supports for unpaid family caregivers, such as the supports that we offer at at Del Oro. So it's an exciting time for our state. My hope is that people continue to learn more about the CRC system and how we are an important piece of that puzzle in supporting individuals. Yes, question.
Is there an organization looking at why it's hard to find anybody who wants to work for an agency that provides in-home care?
Are there organizations like doing research into?
Why it's such a problem? I have been an employer of illegal, and I hate to say this in this company, years ago for my mother-in-law, because I couldn't find help that I could afford through an agency, which is a for-profit business. And people can't afford home health care through a for-profit organization as it currently exists, because these agencies have to follow the licensure requirements of the state of California.
Mm-hmm.
They can't even give a pill unless they have a very expensive, and let me get it corrected if I'm wrong, a better, more expensive license from the state in order to give medications, because you have to have the LVN and stuff. I mean, I have a serious agenda on this, because you can't just go out and put more ads in the paper. You've got to, my opinion, you've got to change the basic core barriers that are preventing a lot of people I know personally in this county that are excellent personal care providers who will not work for an agency, only want cash. That's another one. It's all illegal, under table, and they're out there and they're providing care. You gotta find them. And they're not bonded. They don't have them in fingerprinted, some not, maybe not so good in terms of safety. But when you're desperate, that's what you've got. And that needs to be fixed, in my opinion, because I've gone through enough of this. And it's a need, and it's gonna get worse, just like what you said. We're all getting old, and the young kids aren't having enough babies to support all of us old folks. And so it's a big issue, and I'm thrilled to hear about this one pillar. And I'd like to know more about the input, how this one pillar is going to work. And
So-
I want to be involved with that. And is that through the senior legislative council? Does anybody know that? Do you know that?
So, a couple of questions. It seems like you have an answer to the last question. I'll defer to you.
It's the area agency. It's the California State Agency on Aging at the state level. Yeah.
I'm curious about why you're only getting funding from Area 4, since Amador, Calaveras, and Tuolumne are all Area 12. I think Area 12 ought to be kicking in some money too.
That question is a good one. It's a bit above my pay grade. I wouldn't have a good answer for you. But we also receive funding through private grants and contributions. We do fundraise so that we can continue to offer these services and cover them throughout the year. But I don't have an answer to that question. I did want to address, the question about, is there research being done, or do people know why there's a shortage of professional caregivers? I will say that the pandemic really shone an important light on disparities in provider experiences. Most of the professional caregivers who do work for agencies are actually women of color, and many of whom can be immigrants as well. They have not been well paid, well compensated, even for a really long time. And what we are seeing is an increase, a rise in the cost of in-home care, in part because I think there's been more attention paid to just how poor the wages have been, even at for-profit care agencies for the individual laborers who are doing this kind of work. And a higher wage is going to attract more qualified individuals. It just will. Like, if you can't make a living wage doing this kind of work, why would you do it?
You're competing with the fast food industry. When the fast food hamburger flippers are making more than your personal care provider, who's doing a lot more important work, you have a problem. And that's what's going on that I see.
And I think that I do think that there is research that's being done. For instance, UC Davis Health has a caregiving institute. I couldn't highlight a specific study for you off the top of my head, but just from what I have read, my understanding is that wages are increasing. There is within the Master Plan on Aging a plan to train more individuals about Alzheimer's and dementia care, which is a very different type of care. In-home care for individuals with cognitive decline looks very different than in-home care for someone who maybe has mobility issues. But I think that the pandemic has really highlighted the fact that our care industry needs to change. We at Del Oro don't have a lot of say in how that works apart from our individual advocacy. We do, however, want to make sure that we provide or that we give access to in-home care providers who are being paid a living wage, are bonded and insured if they're going into our clients' homes. As for the issue of people who are doing this kind of work and are not bonded or insured and maybe here receiving payment under the table, I'm certainly aware of that. It's a concern for the health of those individuals and safety of those individuals. Because if they are hurt in the process of providing care to someone, then they don't have a lot of recourse in terms of
But that doesn't make a difference to them. You try to convince people who would need the money and they need the hours.
Sure. So I think that is an issue that's really important for our legislators to be aware of, and it kind of requires grassroots advocacy. It's not necessarily going to happen through an agency like ours, but it's going to require the concerted effort of individuals who are on the ground and seeing this, who can speak to the fact that there are immigrants in their community who are really kind of in this exploitative cycle of providing care without all of the supports.
I've hired some. They're excellent. The Filipinos, I mean, sounds biased and stuff, but by race, I swear, they come as higher in terms of skill set and caring. Their culture's part of caring. Family generation. They care. They're for the long haul. Not everybody, but the people I have worked with, I mean, they're amazing. They're just amazing. And I've got somebody out of Ethiopia. Darn, this is closer. But she's exactly the same, you know? And
What-
they need hours. They
Oh.
need their green card. They need all the stuff our immigration system requires for them, you know? Yeah, it's messy out there.
If you Google Department of Aging, the California Department of Aging, you'll be able to pull up the area plan or the
Master Plan on
master
Aging.
plan. You can pull it up and print it out and read through it, and they would be a really good resource for you, I think, as well.
One other question about eligibility.
Yeah.
What is considered, does somebody have to have a specific diagnosis or a doctor's note? How would you go about asking the physician to make sure that the patient or the client or care receiver is eligible?
Got it. just not to mince words, but for our purposes, the client is going to be the unpaid family caregiver, and then their care receiver is their care receiver. But that's an excellent question. So you do not need to have a specific diagnosis. Again, we have some. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to bounce around like this. We have kind of a breadth of potential conditions that are covered by the criteria that were given. A brain impairment could be, like in the case of my mom, metastatic cancer to the brain, right? Not necessarily Alzheimer's or dementia. Someone who has limitations with 2 or more ADLs, that could be a number of different things in combination with one another. There is a special grant through Parkinson's Association of Northern California, or PANC, that they released to us that we can use to supplement our other respite funds. And for that particular grant, there is a process that involves coordinating with someone's physician to get verification that a care receiver has Parkinson's. But outside of that special supplementary grant, we're not going to ask for like a doctor's note. We're really not going to have a lot of contact with the doctor. We're interfacing with the caregiver.
Okay.
Yeah, does that answer your question?
This is specific because my mom is cognitive decline, and her doctor kind of just, and I'm thinking, do I need to take her to UC Davis or someplace like that? I'm trying to figure out, what's involved in her cognitive decline.
Right.
Get started and getting a lot of this done before she gets to the point that she can't give informed consent and sort of thing.
To that point, I will tell you that a lot of our family practitioners, our family physicians, are not necessarily trained in identifying cognitive decline, and so it might be an area that's uncomfortable for them, in which case, as the caregiver, this is where you have to do a little bit more advocacy and really push for either, I'm sure you have, this is kind of for everybody else out there, right? But you have to push to get those diagnostics. Like, you're the person who's the expert on your person. The family physician needs to know what you've been seeing, especially if you're seeing cognitive change that's interfering with daily life. And if they can't provide those diagnostic tests, then a neurologist needs to. So you need to advocate for a specialist to take a look at mom. And sometimes it can be a bit of a process. And sometimes caregivers feel like they're haranguing the physician. I just want to encourage you that you can politely advocate for yourself again and again and again and again until you get what you need.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
If for example, say the Calaveras Community Foundation wanted to donate money to Del Oro, they could donate it and specifically say it's for only Calaveras County residents. Is that right?
That's an excellent question. Actually, that would be a good conversation to have with our executive director, Michelle Nevins, who handles our grants and how they're dispersed. So if you would like her contact information, I can leave that with you before I go today.
That'd be great.
Yeah, yeah. And thank you for thinking of us. We appreciate it. Did you have another question?
Just to respond to you, I had an identical kind of situation, and my lady was part of Kaiser, but you have to go through the primary to get to all the specialists. And so when I explained Sarah, she has diagnosed Alzheimer's, and she's totally lost it when her husband died. And and I said, I need somebody to take a look at Sarah, and I need somebody who understands her mental condition, because she's absolutely going bonkers, and she needs medication, she needs help. The primary referred me to cognitive therapy by a psychologist. She has no cognitive skills. This is how inadequate the training of a primary working at Kaiser has, and probably everybody else who works in this county. That's primary. I get really angry about this. So I just said, Well, she's very suicidal, you know, and that was the button. I got neurology involved. Threaten, you don't have to say too much if she has any inclination towards hurting herself. Doctors don't like to sit on a suicidal potential patient, and I pushed those buttons, and I couldn't believe how fast I got a neurological evaluation. It was in 1 week. They canceled patients. I had a whole hour with this guy. He was the guy that diagnosed her 5 years before with vascular dementia after her massive stroke. Same neurologist 5 years later, he says, she doesn't have vascular dementia, she has Alzheimer's. Good, put it down in writing, I need that with the letterhead Kaiser, and I need some of the medication. And that letter has helped me so much through Social Security, through you name it.
Yeah.
You need that proof from a doctor, and it was hell getting it. And if I hadn't been a nurse and understood the system, it's hard.
Yes.
It's
I'm
hard.
a nurse.
I know, you're a nurse.
I've been in
You
preventive
know
health
this
care
stuff.
for the aging for years,
Yeah.
and the surprise is, you know, he says, well, you know, she's 86, and that just happens, and I'm like, right now I'm working through reducing medications to look at polypharmacy.
Yeah.
And then the next step is to get, you know, to UC Davis or something like that.
I would sure push you for UC.
Yeah.
At least get a competent neurologist.
Yeah, and pain management, 'cause
And pain.
mobility and.
Oh, all of that stuff are factors.
And I
yeah.
think a lot of, you know, care receivers, it was hard for them in the pandemic.
Oh yeah, it was hard.
The social isolation
Yeah.
affects people.
Definitely. I think it affected just universally care receivers and their caregivers too. You know, a cognitive impairment can be such an isolating experience, and when you're supporting someone with a cognitive impairment, it can be really isolating too if there's no outlet because there's a fear of this virus that could kill the person you're caring for. So, yeah, it's not to be understated that COVID had a really negative impact on a lot of people, and we're still trying to come back from that. I will say one last thing about Alzheimer's disease, dementia. It's not a normal part of aging. So if you ever hear someone say, oh, mom's just getting old, oh, your husband's just old, first of all, that's ageist. Second of all, it's just wrong. Like, if you're noticing a decline in cognition that's interfering with daily life, that's worth testing and getting to the bottom of, because it's not a normal part of aging. It's not. So I will end with our contact information and ways to get in touch with us. If you're interested in becoming a client, you can either give us a call at our main phone number, 916-728-9333. You can check us out online at deloro.org, including our support group listings. We also have list resources by county too. Sometimes people call us and want to know about Meals on Wheels or transportation, and we try to keep updated listings of those things. We also, for those who are tech savvy and would prefer to go the computer route, you can also begin the process of establishing eligibility through this online portal called CareNav, which is on our website. So there are a couple of different options, and I'll just leave you with the words of one of our clients from our Area 4 respite survey. I can't say enough good things about Del Oro and the staff. I'm so fortunate to have connected 6 years ago. I'm forever grateful for the emotional support and the guidance to resources that Del Oro has provided me on this journey. So I love this for a lot of different reasons, but the fact that this individual was at this time caring for a loved one for 6+ years. This is the clientele that we serve, people who are supporting someone for even upwards of a decade or more. All right.